我が手に踊れ塩蜜の玉、我が手で歌え塩汁の玉、満たせと願わば塩みなぎりて、閉じよと願わばくがちけならん、うな坂開く道引きの玉。
Welcome back, nerds. Fino here with a guide for Hibiki and Chikagi, aka Azumi-no-isora. They're a limited 5-star alter ego introduced in the Dancing Dragon Castle event, which should be coming after the Summer Adventure and Lilim Harlot reruns. Now, if you told me we were getting a pseudo-servant based off any duo in the Nasuverse, well, Hisui and Kwaku would have been my guess. Instead, we're getting the mascots of a Type Moon website? Alright, sure, why not? Beyond their relative obscurity, Hibiki and Chikagi have a far bigger issue, being sandwiched between powerful Mahoyo collab units on one hand, and Juggernaut Anniversary and Summer Celeb servants on the other hand. Oh yeah, and a Draco rerun to boot, so they have their work cut out for them. They do start on strong footing though, with Gate of Waratsumi. This is their battery and it gives 30% charge to the pair, and then 20% charge to the party. So that's 50% total for Isora, and then it throws a max health buff in there for shits and giggles. Splashable batteries like this on an attacker is something that's highly valuable in multi-core teams, ones where you typically run both a single target and AoE servant to handle the more complex formations and larger health values in endgame farming nodes. In that equation, Isora slots in as the AoE component with Unasaka Hiraku Michiki no Tama. This is an AoE quick attack that gives preemptive NP gain on waterside terrain, an AoE defensive buff purge, fixed percentage anti-chaotic damage, and an overcharge effect for a single turn quick/buster buff. Okay, so now we have an anti-buff in the equation. An anti-chaotic is a very useful one as far as anti-alignment buffs go, possibly the best. Tragic that it doesn't scale with overcharge, but a fixed magnitude anti-buff is an anti-buff nevertheless. That waterside effect is no idle threat. Thanks to Tide Flowing Jewel/Tide Ebbing Jewel, this pair of literal Who's can apply that terrain and distribute 3 turns of NP damage across your frontline. Yet another nice multi-core tool. Then it has a pair of on-hit effects. Quick cards apply defense down, while buster cards give crit damage. Something for longer, messier fights. Another benefit of this skill is that it activates one of Azumi-no-isora's passives, Protection of the Great Crocodile. This gives incremental value, 5 stars and 5% charge per turn while you're on appropriate terrain. A little bonus. When you're team building, it's worth noting that both Original Nemo and Summer Scotty gain additional effects on waterside terrain. You don't really NP with Summer Scotty in normal conditions, but when certain stars align, you can get enough charge onto her with Event CEs, a Pen 2, Gate of Waratsumi, and 10% from any other source. She essentially becomes free damage in this situation, especially if you're a psychopath that got her above NP 1. Rounding out their skill set is Isora Dance. This is a 3-turn party buster, quick NP gain combo with a 2-hit evade for Hibiki and Chikagi. Leveling this should be your second priority after your battery. Given the presence of these hybrid buffs and the on-hit effects from the Tide Jewels, Hibiki and Chikagi have a strong incentive to ride with Summer Scotty, due to her own hybrid buffs and buster crit support. Certainly for single core farming and boss fights, double Summer Scotty will be your bread and butter. For non-farming applications, you can run Yui Shosets to apply an arts buff and trigger the triple buff on her Noble Phantasm to give a combo of attack, crit, and NP damage. One very unusual thing about Hibiki and Chikagi is that their underlying tags change a lot based on their ascension. This is the most notable in attributes, where ascensions 1, 2, and 3 are human, earth, and star respectively. This lets you fine-tune that 10% advantage you get from an advantageous attribute, so it's worth swapping around if you find yourself falling slightly short. As for traits and alignments, these have 2 states depending on whether you're Ascension 3 or not. In Ascensions 1 and 2, Azumi-no-isora has the group servant and living human traits. There are servants that interact with these aspects, like Santa Nemo and Voyager, but the problem here is that most of them are AoE attackers, and there's usually not a good reason to double dip on those. Phantasmoon is a single target that charges living humans, but it's a rare situation that calls for both an alter ego and a pretender to attack at the same time, setting aside Oberon, of course. Going from Ascensions 2 to 3, Isora changes from lawful good to neutral balanced, from female to unknown, and loses the group servant and living human traits. In their place are levitating and enema elish nullification. Not that you'd fight Lalak or Gilgamesh with this servant, so the traits are mostly just flavor. Being able to change alignment and gender, though, might have some niche usage to get around enemy skills and boss fight gimmicks. Is there a fight coming down the road where this is relevant? Not that I can think of, but you never know. Equipment-wise, things are pretty simple. Black Grail if you have it, Traces of Christmases Past if you don't. Nothing unusual in that department. If you want to get creative, though, there are a few teammates that I think may interest you. Lilith is a berserker coming down the road in Ordeal Call 4, and her Noble Phantasm applies both the chaotic and evil alignments onto the enemy that it hits. This turns on Hibiki and Chikagi's own anti-buff, so chaining Lilith into their NP is a great way to stretch your damage, if you have enough charge to fire them off simultaneously. Another promising ally is Wangina, if you keep Isora in Ascension 1. This locks them into the human attribute, and Wangina can give those additional NP damage. In longer fights, this also helps her gain a supplementary source of Spirit's Anger stacks, since she'll obtain them whenever Isora gets hit. In addition, Wangina has a handy suite of party buffs: attack, crit damage, charge regeneration, and a little healing if it should be necessary. Both Lilith and Wangina are single-target quick attackers, and while the latter has a limited scope in farming, she mostly specializes in fighting other foreigners with her anti-threat to humanity damage. They let you run a potentially strong, multi-core composition. While Hibiki and Chikagi's own credentials on this front are impressive, they're undercut somewhat by their own class. Alter Ego is not the most desirable farming class, since they tend to get fucked over by mixed class nodes. When they aren't obstructed, they can put up a fight, which is the case for servants like Tiamat and Isora. Or you can be Khazra drop and just fucking cheat. But the fact that alter egos do 1.5 times damage against casters, assassins, and riders means that there is a pressure to get a higher NP level than you would on someone with true class advantage. That's the case for a lot of generalist/semi-generalist servants, and it's not an abnormal flaw specific to this duo. But it does mean that when you're budgeting for this year, you have to weigh the need to get NP 2 or 3 on Hibiki and Chikagi versus all the other really important shit you're aiming for. CL and Space Arash are still looming on the horizon, and it's hard to justify a detour at this juncture. But if you're hellbent on throwing in with Azumi-no-isora, they do have a robust skill set, plus tag shifting can be fun if you like to mess around. They're very much a choose-your-own-adventure type servant. Not optimal, considering we've got Loey coming on Christmas, but if you're a fan of their aesthetics, they can take you pretty far with some investment. Gameplay-wise, there are 2 miscellaneous things to note. The first is that you can't unlock Ascension 3 until you clear either the event's main story or the event ends. Apparently its identity is something of a spoiler, and I have to say it has a very tantalizing name. Though I don't believe there's any connection between them and the other thing in FGO that shares their name. I don't mean Triton, by the way, though that is the basis for Ascension 3's appearance. The other tidbit is that there are a number of craft essences in this game that give huge bond bonuses to servants that meet specific conditions. 2 of these work for Azumi-no-isora's 3rd Ascension. Alien God affects star attributes, and Great Library of Memories works on neutral alignments. But in Ascensions 1 and 2, Hibiki and Chikagi are affected by Chaldea Mourning, which augments living humans, Report Check, which works on lawful good servants, and For the Blessed Bride, which specifically works on lawful females. So if you're bond maxing Isora, it's actually better to keep them in those early Ascensions. All of these craft essences can be found, or were found, in the Mana Prism shop, though they're on a global timer, and once that expires, you'll have to pay the rare prism tax to get them back in rotation. This storytime is going to be a huge mess, fair warning. As for the deity Azumi-no-isora, there's a story that he had jewels to control the tides, and a certain empress wanted his help for a little project of hers. But Isora, being a longtime sea dweller, had his face absolutely covered by unsightly sea creatures, barnacles and mollusks and whatnot. Aw fuck, not thinking of Tsukihime H scenes. So yeah, Isora didn't want to show his seafood buffet face and stayed hidden. But one of the other gods was able to lure him out with a lovely dance. He was like, nice. I'm still not going to show up at the court, but you're welcome to take my gems as a gift. The grateful empress then took these gems and used them to invade Korea. This is a historical Pandora's box, since she wins in the legend and conquers the 3 kingdoms, but historically the Japanese got booted out of their would-be conquests. Wow, what an amazing story. Unfortunately, a lot of the info I could get a hold of was pretty vague or purely in Japanese, which complicated matters. Not much of a story segment, right? I thought so too, which is why I went and read Maotsukai no Hako, Starlit Marmalade. This is a manga, and while it's not the original form they appeared in, it's what I could find. Hibiki and Chikagi started as mascots for the Type Moon mobile website, until it underwent a major revision. But since then, they've had cameo roles here and there. You may remember them from that one episode of Carnival Phantasm, where they work at the cafe where all the Neko arcs are. Also, there was a talking flip phone, which wasn't in this manga, so I don't know what's up with him. Starlit Marmalade doesn't have anything to do with the cafe, but instead focuses on the school lives of Hibiki and Chikagi. Katsuragi Chikagi, the green one, is a loner who lives in the shadow of her much more popular, borderline legendary sister. She became cynical after she realized that people at her old school had been approaching her just to get close to said sister, so she put up an abrasive front to drive these social climbers away. However, on the first day of classes, she's approached by Hibiki, the orange one. Chikagi's efforts to drive her away have zero effect, and after Hibiki displays abnormally high strength, this sets off a frenzy of clubs trying to recruit them, since Hibiki will only join the club that Chikagi is in. They end up in one about sweets, thanks to a bit of trickery, where one of their classmates pretends not to understand their names and asks them to write it down. Instead of settling into a typical school life, the two of them get dragged into a series of supernatural incidents involving things like a library with no apparent exit and a former friend who has a psychotic obsession with Chikagi's sister. The latter gained a plant parasite familiar from an unknown magus and used it to attack anyone who got close to Chikagi. The incident gets so bad that an executor from the church gets involved, and she laments not borrowing CL's flamethrower. Chikagi is thrown into the school swimming pool in the battle, and while rescuing her, Hibiki transforms into a different entity, one that the executor calls the sole miracle in the world created by a dead apostle ancestor, the Holy Scripture Triton. Now, dead apostles are vampires, and an ancestor is a super vampire, so for one of those to make something holy is quite an anomaly, though the manga ends before we get any information on that. Despite sacrificing more and more of her body to the parasite, the attacker is unable to touch Triton and is defeated in a single attack, forcing her to flee with most of her familiar destroyed. At this point, the executor debates capturing Triton, but upon seeing their sad face, decides to fall back on observation instead. Chikagi wakes up later. Hibiki tells her it was all a dream, they get along a little better, and Hibiki even convinces Chikagi to adopt her signature twin tails. The end. No other volumes were ever printed. Well, I didn't go into this expecting to do a review, but Starlight Marmalade is a very mediocre manga. For most of its very short run, it's indistinguishable from a million other school supernatural activity series. And until 3 chapters in, when Chikagi's sister shows up wearing a Hassan mask, you wouldn't necessarily know it's a Type Moon series either. Would not recommend. Thanks for watching, lads. Like if you found this video interesting, subscribe for more servant guides and histories, and if you got time to spare, come watch me at twitch.tv/Finotaisen, where I stream every week. Friday's gonna have the Chaos Wheel, Yu-Gi-Oh! 5D Stardust Accelerator on Saturday, and on Sunday I'll be rolling presumably for the second round of Strange Fake Servants. Still got my fingers crossed for Zealot, since Jack is looking less and less likely. I'll see you there.